Good evening, Second Creek families. It is so nice to be here with you tonight to be reading chapters 29 and 30 of our book, Nugly. Get your reading glasses ready. Okay, so chapter 29 Life as Young Pho. Thwack ack ack. Three pho bob for the Vo family. Coming up. Ting ting ting. Slap slap slap. Yes. Do you have. I got it, Mom. Did you start the summer rolls, yes. Just adding the chop, the shrimp, chop, now. Ding, ding, ding. Great. Thanks, Mom. I'll go see who it is. Okay, thwack, eck, eck, eck. I love you. But before Mrs. Young could even finish her sentence, Emily had shouldered her way through the double doors that separated the kitchen from the dining room floor, carrying a big tray on which mother and daughter had perfectly balanced three piping hot bowls of pho. For the briefest of seconds, Miss Young stopped to gaze at the spot where her daughter had just been, the door still lightly thwacking back and forth from the fourth force with which Emily had pushed them apart. Then another ding from outside signaled new customers coming in, and Miss Young went right back to work. She threw two more bowls on the crowded counter. Ting ting! Dropped bright red beef slices into each one. Slap slap! And poured golden, steaming, aromatic beef broth on top, each bowl lined up seamlessly so that not a drop slopped out. Each slice of beef magically turned just the perfect shade of pink as the boiling broth cooked the raw meat. Miss Young had just enough time to chop and add a sprinkling of sprouts and spices before Emily was back in the kitchen, breathlessly calling out, Mr. and Mrs. Doherty. I know, Miss Young said, turning and handing Emily the two bowls she had just prepared. They always come this time on Tuesdays. Emily just grabbed the bowls, nodded, and muttered this information back to herself, as if to burn it into her memory, while she went backward out the door, and the whole dance started all over again. The Youngs were pros. They were nonstop. They were a sight to behold. And the whole time, they didn't spill anything. Nugget was torn between excruciation, admiration, and sheer sensory overload. He'd drooled his way through the entirety of the lunch rush, as Mrs. Young chopped, wrapped, scooped, stirred, and cut. He didn't know what was more impressive, how incredibly good Mrs. Young was at cooking, or how incredibly good Nugget was at hiding. Having quietly followed Emily downstairs and along the hall, Nugget stopped just outside the industrial steel door, remembering the words of the baker he'd met on the street all those weeks ago. My boss would not want you in here. Total health code violation. He didn't want to get the Youngs in trouble, so he stayed hidden in the hallway. Thankfully, Emily had left the door ajar just a crack, so he was able to spy on the beautiful symphony of sounds and smells in the kitchen, all while perfectly hidden. You know I know you're there, yes? Miss Young asked. Nugget looked around to see if Emily was there, but there was no one else. Weird. Miss Young must have been talking to herself. Well, fine. Let me show you something. Miss Young crossed the kitchen to a vat so big that it had to be holding 50 gallons of broth minimum. Nugget shimmied his position to observe her closely, imagining the possibility of leftovers. Surely she could afford to give a starving puppy at least like 20 gallons. You see how it looks completely calm? Miss Young said, stirring the golden broth with a huge ladle. Well, you have to be careful. You can't bother me when I'm over here. Everything in here is boiling hot. Nugget tilted his head. It didn't look like anything was boiling. He could smell the heat radiating off the vats, even from out in the hall. But the surface of the liquid was completely smooth. I know it looks like nothing is happening, Ms. Young began, but that's just because all the fat has risen to the surface. The fat is heavier than the water, so it forms a sort of lid that blocks you from seeing what's happening beneath it, where all the wonderful flavors and juices have been stewing for hours. Nugget's eyes widened in anticipation, unsure what would happen next. You can't let the appearance fool you. That's dangerous, Miss Young warned. But if you look through to what's underneath, She skimmed a big scoop off the surface with her ladle, and a mouth-watering scent exploded into the room like a genie escaping from a lamp. That's where all the best things are. She smiled like she had just said something important. Maybe she had. Nugget was still kind of focused on what was going on with the ladle. Then Emily burst through the doors. One bonjour, she called out, and immediately she was gone again. Right. That was the other thing Nugget was supposed to be focusing on. Spying on the kitchen was thrilling, but it wasn't helping him get any closer to Emily or to solving the mystery of what had come between her and her mother. As long as Emily was working in front of house, Nugget's only real hope of spending time with her was to follow her out onto the main floor of the restaurant, which he absolutely wasn't supposed to do. And anyway, every time he thought about it, he had a vision of patrons outside, chatting happily, enjoying their food, until Nugget emerged through the double doors. First, one set of eyes would fall on him, then another and another, till everyone in the restaurant would be staring in horror at the noseless dog, and no one would have any appetite whatsoever, and then the business would be ruined. Nugget could see it all clearly, and it made his stomach churn. In fact, it was almost enough to put him off his appetite, which for Nugget was really saying something. Seeking comfort, he subconsciously started to creep closer to the door. Ah, ah! Miss Young began to warn, causing Nugget to freeze just as Emily burst back in and said, We need three. Oh, come on, Mom. He cannot come in here. You know what? Miss Young looked up at her daughter and smiled. You're absolutely right. He needs to get out of here and into the fresh air. And so do you. Emily tensed up instantly, her shoulders hitching up around her ears. No, I don't. According to Massachusetts state law, Miss Young said dryly, you really do. And you can take. Wait a second. It's Tuesday. You have field hockey on Tuesdays. Were you just not going to say anything about it? Emily visibly strained not to whip her head as as from the front of the house another ding announced more customers arriving. I don't need to go, she said. I can skip practice. You need help here. You need to play, Miss Young said firmly. All kids do. Fine. Emily threw her hands up. Then I guess I can't walk the dog. Why not? I can't just take him to the athletic field with me. There's sticks and balls flying everywhere, and it's busy. He'd hate it. I'd love that, Nugget thought urgently. He'd love that, Miss Young smiled. Nugget really liked Miss Young. Emily made one last weak attempt as her mother crossed behind her in the cramped kitchen aisle. How can I take him with me? I don't even know his name. They didn't tell me a name, Miss Young said, concentrating on something behind Emily's shoulder. What a perfect chance for you to think of one while you get to know each other better. She stepped back. With one smooth move, she untied the back of Emily's apron and handed her Nugget's leash. She had also produced a bag of athletic equipment from somewhere in a cupboard that Nugget hadn't even seen her open or shut. In her own kitchen, there was nothing Miss Young could not do. Which was how Emily Young found herself being pulled out the back of the building by an eager Nugget, off to a world where they knew each other better and away from the bustle of Jungfa. Ding! Chapter 30 The Captains of Ronin Park. Within just a few minutes, Nugget had already learned several fascinating things about Emily Young. Could you slow down? You don't even know where you're going. I know where we're going. You should be following me. For one thing, she talked to Nugget just as much as her mother did when they were alone, albeit in a slightly different tone. Of course, the faster we get to practice, the faster we can get back to helping Mom. So that's something, I guess. That was another fascinating thing. For a girl who apparently played field hockey, owned a bunch of field hockey equipment, and wore shirts covered in just the kind of grass stains you'd get if you were really enthusiastically playing field hockey, didn't seem that excited to go to field hockey. Nugget pondered these things as Emily led him up a weedy sidewalk to the crest of a hill, where a green and multi-leveled park revealed itself, rolling down the other side of the hill in stages. like an enormous grassy staircase that descended all the way to the eternal blue shine of Boston Harbor below. Etched into the concrete base of a flagpole were the words Ronan Park. And on the far side of that flagpole was a field full of girls wearing thick gloves and running shoes. Each girl ran at full tilt across the grass, brandishing J-shaped sticks in pursuit of a whizzing white ball. Field hockey practice was already in full swing. This was when Nugget suddenly went from learning a few things about Emily to learning a lot. The moment the other girls came into view, Nugget's nose was on fire with the smell of fear. It was coming, he quickly realized, from Emily, who positively crackled with the smell like an emergency flare shooting sparks into the air. And it wasn't just any fear either. It was the fear very specifically of being seen. Nugget recognized it because he had felt that fear himself. He'd felt it every day back at Father Patrick's last chance animal shelter. And, if he was being honest, he was feeling it now as the two of them slowly approached the playing field, each one more reluctant than the other to advance. It was the kind of fear that said, "Please don't notice me. Please don't look at me. Please don't." But that was the worst thing about fear. It always came true. "Hey, Zhang, you're late." A girl a couple years older than Emily jogged over, her sandy brown ponytail bouncing behind her. She wore a maroon jersey that read Gorgons. A couple feet above Nugget's head, Emily's knuckles squeezed so tightly around the handle of his leash that Nugget could feel the physical tug of her distress. "I'm sorry, Madison," Emily said. "I was helping my—" "Sorry isn't going to win us any matches." This came from another sandy haired girl who had also peeled away from practice. They weren't twins. Nugget would have smelled it if they were related. But between their ponytails and their uniforms, they looked nearly identical. "Lexington is right," said Madison. "You need to start prioritizing." Oh my God, what is that? And now everyone's fears had come true. The two girls had finally noticed Nugget. At Father Patrick's, some of the visiting families had had the decency to try not to stare at Nugget's nose, or rather his lack thereof. Or maybe those families weren't being decent. Maybe they just didn't want to look again and risk catching a second glimpse of the terrible thing they thought they'd just seen out of the corner of their eye. Whatever the reason, it had worked fine for Nugget. Well, no, it had felt terrible, but it had been better than somebody openly gawking in horror. The girls, though, born to gawk. International first class gawk stars. Their jaws dropped. Their eyes widened. Madison even took a step back, as if Nugget was somehow contagious. It all made Nugget want to bury himself, to hide himself from the light. But here on this wide, flat field, there was nowhere to go, and Emily's tight grip on the leash wouldn't have let him go anyway. He's a dog." Emily's words were stiff, like each one had been clinging to her teeth before she forcibly pushed them out of her mouth. God, wow. Lexington made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a lasp. And a lasp. I mispronounced that word. Look at that. Even grown-ups sometimes misread words and make mistakes. Okay. Lexington made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. "Are you sure? What's its name?" He doesn't have one yet. This time, when Madison made a sound, there was no mistake. It was a laugh, and not a nice one. "You should call it ugly," she said. It was at this point that Nugget sort of broke in two. One part of him was still standing there, still living through his worst nightmare, still looking up helplessly, while these two girls made him feel the smallest he had ever felt. The other part of him, though, much quieter, yes, but still a real, distinct part with a soft and persistent voice, was watching all this from a distance. And that part was whispering, "You know, Miss Young didn't react this way when she saw you. She was kind. Even Emily didn't laugh at you." Which led him to the next thought. Maybe someone being this mean says more about them than it does about me. It was an odd thought, but it sat there at the bottom of Nugget's mind, as if waiting for him to sniff at it later when he was ready. And then something even odder happened. Emily seemed to have the exact same thought. Yeah, Lexington was saying, you should mind your own business, Emily blurted. And he's not an it. This outburst seemed to surprise everyone involved, Emily most of all. Well, Lexington intoned, her words ice cold. If that's how you want to talk to your team captains. I didn't, Emily stammered. Whatever, Madison interjected. We're about to start a scrimmage, but you can start by taking the bench. But despair rolled off Emily in waves. But I took the bench last time. And you were late last time, too. Madison shook her head as she continued to back away toward the field, pretending to look disappointed. But Nugget could smell the truth. And the truth was that she wasn't disappointed at all. She'd wanted this to happen. Honestly, Jung, I don't know how you ever hope to improve if you keep this behavior up. What if we have to cut you from the team? As one, the two captains turned and took to the field, leaving Emily alone with Nugget. Now look at the mess we're in, Emily grumbled. But in a direct reversal of Madison's deception, Emily wasn't actually angry. She really did smell of pure, unleaded disappointment, and there was no blame in her eyes for Nugget. She wasn't even looking at him as she spoke. She only had eyes for the field, and all the happy girls on it, each preparing to play some hockey. Wait, shoot, we need to talk about field hockey. And with that, that is the end of chapter 30. We will see you all here tomorrow night for the reading of chapter 31. Have a wonderful evening, Second Creek Bison. Thank you so much for joining me in reading chapters 29 and 30. Take care. See you soon.